bit of a talk about, just stand in front of the microphone, friction in payments, and a bit of a discussion on where are we today, and across all of Google, what are we seeing out there as to where the industry and the ecosystem's going. So I want to start this story with, this session with a little bit of a story. So I have a 20-year-old son, and I've got an agreement with him. I pay his university fees if he passes his subjects each year. So last Friday this happened actually. That time of the year came around again, time to pay his fees. He showed me his results, great results. And I went onto the university website to pay the fees. And the transaction was declined. Frustrating, I whipped out another credit card, paid the fees with that, and then we were done. I thought we were done. 10 minutes later, I get a message from my bank from the first credit card saying, suspicious transaction, your card's on hold. Do you want to approve the transaction or cancel the card? I actually didn't want either of those options. I wanted to just cancel the transaction because I'd already paid with it from someone else. So that then started an hour of playing on call centres, authenticating myself multiple times, and essentially a level of frustration that has made me think even more it's time to find another credit card provider for my primary card. So why do I tell you that story? There's a whole bunch of different friction points in that process that we are certainly seeing across all parts of Google, and I'll talk a little bit about what Google does before I get into the discussion in a moment, but a number of friction points. So why did I have to authenticate myself 3 times? As I went through that journey of suspicious transaction and then clearing it and then getting the card unblocked. Why did I have to wait 10 minutes to get the notification? Now, it could have been a bank problem, it could have been a telco problem, it could have been a poor signal problem. Me as the customer or the consumer, I don't care which one of the problems are, where the problems come from. Why did I have to wait 10 minutes? Why did it then take an hour or 45 minutes in a call centre queue before a human talked to me, and that human then had me authenticate again? All of these issues come together to create a whole set of friction points that we certainly have a fairly strong point of view on at Google around how can we help address some of these. So the discussion today is really focused on how do we think about all of the different capabilities today, where the ecosystem is going in the future, where things like blockchain, what Web3 is, and I'm going to ask the panellists in a moment how they define Web3, because as you know, there's a lot of different definitions out there. What are all these different technologies and components going to mean if you put the consumer, whether that's an individual like you and I, whether it's a merchant, a business, if you put the end customer at the heart of the process, what is that going to mean for payments in the future when we think about all of the emerging technologies that are coming down the line? So Google's got a number of strings in the bow when it comes to payments. We're represented today from a number of different business units within Google, including the Google Pay business, where we really focus on our consumer engagements through products like Google Pay, Google Wallet, our merchant channels, so the Play Store, Google Maps, Google Search, etc. We're also doing a lot of work from our cloud business in enabling enterprises to then deliver our next generation payments capability. And they could be the large established banks or non-bank institutions, they could be startups, or they could be mature digital natives. And there's a number of Australian and local representatives in that community that we work with today, such as Airwallex, PayPal and so on. So there's a lot of things that we've learned as we work with some of these industry participants and disruptors as we think about payments. One of the third area that we are just beginning to do a bit more work in now is supporting the payment rails providers. So this is, for example, SWIFT from an international payments perspective, and in India, UPI, so the digital real-time payments networks. There's a lot of interesting work if you rethink the process of customer engagement in payments. How can Google work within that ecosystem to make that a lot more frictionless for the end consumers? And then finally, the future. So when people think about Google, they think about innovation agendas and pure research and applied research in terms of some of the things that we work on that will hopefully help disrupt the industry at a global level down the track. So there's a lot of really interesting things that we're doing around the Web3 blockchain area that will over time begin to provide another set of transformation capabilities into the payment space. So with that, I'd like to introduce my three panellists. In fact, I won't introduce them because we've just done introductions. But what we have is representatives from three different parts of Google. So Will over here on the left looks as our head of payments ecosystems for Australia for Google Pay and Wallet. Kunal leads our FinTech practice here in Australia, and then Travis has an APAC CTO advisory role in helping set strategic transformation agendas. So, I'd like to take a seat over here and ask some questions. We on? Yep, cool. All right, so I'd like to start with resilience. So most of the engagements that Google in our enterprise business in the cloud team works with end customers from a payments perspective usually begin with a major set of operational resilience issues. So major outages, they're in the press all the time, you know what I'm talking about here. And often the payments leads will be told by the board, the CEO, this is unacceptable, we don't want to have the reputational risk and so on. How are we going to deal with this? So we'll often get engaged at that early stage in helping advise where technology can help solve some of those resilience problems. So Travis, first question's for you. What are some of the technology factors that organisations should be thinking about in terms of capabilities today and into the future to address this resilience problem in payments?
Yeah, absolutely. I think resilience is one of those things that is really closely tied to customer expectation. And if you look at the world of finances and real-time payments, real-time settlement, micro lending, immediate credit, all those things, customer expectations are moving to a world, much like they expect from services like Google, always on, always available, always performant. And with those customer expectations comes a responsibility to think about how to solve for resiliency in a really modern way. I think the biggest trend I've seen working with customers in navigating that space is the intersection of security and public networks. So if you think about the way that we've historically thought about securing financial transactions or what we normally think of as FinSys, those have been on private networks, and obviously those have a lot of good security guardrails around how you think about those dimensions of securing payments. And how do you intersect that with the scale, speed, and flexibility of global networks, where you have the broader internet capability? I think as we continue to evolve the security profile and think about the intersection of those and driving more towards those public networks, in a secure fashion, you'll find the intersection and meet those customer expectations.
Cool, thanks. So Kunal, you work with a lot of our FinTech clients in Australia, small and large. Anything from a startup or a FinTech perspective that you think is of interest in this topic of resilience when you come from that new startup point of view?
Yeah, certainly. Thinking of resiliency from a customer experience point of view, what is really important is to make a differentiation between a wholesale payment and a consumer payment. Especially on the consumer side, we're talking not only about backup and recovery and those things. That's almost a given, right? What we are talking about is customer having multiple options to make a certain payment. So if we think about a point of sale payment, being able to tap your phone, tap your smartwatch, or as a backup, if that is not working, using a gift card, MasterCard, whatever way of payment that you want to use, having that option to do that. Or if you're going to pay on a e-commerce website, right, that experience of single-click purchase, single-click delivery, all those models, they require some sophistication in terms of how do they access the card information in a secure way. Or the fallback plan, they could be using GPay or PayPal as an example. So that's purely from options, having multiple options for the customer. What is really important is actually baking in security into that experience and making it frictionless, right? So having biometrics on your mobile devices to protect your Google Wallet or any mobile wallet, to be honest. And on when you're using your desktop to make any purchase on a web platform, you want to be able to get information from your Google Wallet or any mobile wallet and provision that very easily or autofill that into a checkout experience. Make that frictionless. So those are the two things that really stand out.
Cool, thanks, Kunal. So you talked about customer experience. I'm going to ask Will a question now, really focus on Google's overall mission of managing the world's information and making it universally accessible and the implications of that for our payments business. So Google does obviously have a very strong payments business here in Australia and globally. So in addition to being a provider to the industry, we're also a participant in the industry with all of the customer experience challenges, the regulatory requirements and so on that a payments provider needs to accommodate. So with that, Will, I'd like to first of all ask you to just share a little bit about the way we think about our Google Payments experiences today and a little bit about our strategy on where we're going with Google Pay and Google Wallet. And when you're answering that question, I'd really like to understand the perspectives both on how consumers and merchants in the ecosystem are driving our strategy.
Sure. I think the best way to think about how we approach it at Google has a lot to do with the user-centric view of being helpful. So when you're going about your day, trying to make a payment in store, make a payment online, you are confronted with different points of friction. And one of the things that we can do as Google is surface the right information at the right time and take care of that for the users. This started off very much focused on payments with our product that when we first launched it, and it's now expanded beyond that. So now, when we're talking about connecting, say, merchants and consumers, it's not just a transaction, for example, as a payment. In many cases it is, but it could be, things like during the pandemic, where you could actually add your COVID card to Google Wallet, and helping provide useful information to people at the right time to help them get through their lives. That is pretty much the common thread that runs through our strategies, helping solve these challenges and make it more delightful when you go shopping online or when you transact in store. What we find is that our position in the ecosystem with these very large platforms like Chrome and Android is a unique one where we're able to connect consumers and merchants in a very powerful way. So, one example is Chrome Autofill. You mentioned it before. It's a pretty humble product when you think that it fills credit cards on Chrome. But it actually has a significant impact on merchants, on the number of people that can check out on their website, on the speed and safety and security. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes to enable these things, and sometimes they're not as obvious to the user, nor should they be.
Right. Cool, thank you. So when I introduced the session and talked about my experience last Friday paying my son's university fees, one of the issues that came up there was trust and authentication. So I'd like to just ask a follow-up customer experience question for Travis now around, we hear a lot about Web3, there's a lot of different definitions of what it means today and what it will potentially look like in the future. I guess what I'm interested in just understanding is your perspectives on what does Web3 mean for the payment system, and maybe let's begin with actually a definition of how you think about Web3.
Web3, my favorite topic. The most misunderstood thing, everyone has to have a trend on the misunderstood technology trend of the world. Web3 is our current one. The way we look at it at Google is, if you think of the first generation of the internet or the web, it was very much a consumer-driven experience. So, you're consuming content, you're consuming information. The second one was really about community and interconnection and participation. So how do I think about social media or YouTube and or modern version TikTok, and thinking about how do I participate. This third generation in Web3 is really all about ownership, and that's the new model that we're all looking at. And so the technology trends that back that are things like blockchain, of course, in the early days, and if you think through brokers and oracles and some of the stuff that's coming out now, those are some of the empowering technologies that are moving that drift towards ownership. For me, there's really two big topics that drive those user experiences. One is around data, and the importance of understanding who owns your data, what do you own and what do you relinquish back, and how do you think about the data ecosystem around the user, and continuing to consolidate those data ecosystems into something that provides value. And the second is really about identity. As we think about the ownership model, the combination of data and identity are really driving what the future of Web3 is going to look like, and excited to be part of that future.
Cool, thank you. So let's have a little bit of a talk on that related topic around buy now, pay later. So obviously the experiment's been underway for a few years now. There's a lot of, let me just give you some statistics that I pulled together the other day. So in Australia in FY21, there was about $12 billion of payments put through buy now, pay later, 5.9 million active accounts. The industry expects regulation is coming in a more stringent form in the not too distant future. And of course, market caps for many of the pure play buy now, pay later startups are sort of down 80, 90%. So a question for you, Kunal, given your work in the payment space and the broader fintech space in Australia. I guess there's two parts to the question. So one is, what can we take away from the buy now, pay later experience of the last few years as it relates to payments? And then related to that, what's the next big thing in payments?
The first part is easy, so let me try and cover that first. Buy now, pay later is going through its own challenges, right? Like we all agree, we all anticipate there is going to be some regulation in that area. So let's park that for a second. If you think of BNPL as a business model, what that has allowed companies to do, these buy now, pay later companies, is to acquire some incredible amount of rich data, right? So they're no longer getting the information that Kunal is spending $100 at Foot Locker. They are getting very specific information about the sneaker that Kunal is buying and the brand of socks that Kunal is buying. And the next week, Kunal is buying a gym membership at a local place. So there is an incredible insight that you can derive from this information, so you can build up interesting profiles for a customer. But we also have to be mindful that the buy now, pay later also has the merchant side information with them, right? So what products, what services that certain merchants are offering. So you think of buy now, pay later as a purely customer acquisition engine, which is how they started. They're very quickly pivoting into this model of driving some incredible personalized experiences, exclusive offers for their customers. So they're moving into this brand loyalty, driving more of an awareness towards a certain product, that kind of space. And it's really important to sort of acknowledge that evolution. The second part to your question was, what has that industry done? Is that if you think of buy now, pay later, it really collapsed two very different functions, which are short-term lending and payments, into a very seamless experience for the customer. Right, so in near future, you can almost anticipate some innovation in products in that area that you don't necessarily have separate accounts for savings and a separate account for short-term lending. The banks and these companies can very easily value that customer based on the data that they have, put a value on that customer, and say that I'm happy to lend that person for a short amount of time, X amount of money. So I think that's the next evolution that we're going to see.
Well, that's a novel idea, data-driven financial services. Okay, so let's talk a little bit now. Thanks for that, Kunal. Let's talk a little bit now about micropayments, and in particular, the potential future that may evolve in Australia. And I'd like to pose this question to you, Will, and it's on the back of Google's experience in India, where in India today the stats say that per capita, and of course India is a very different structural setup to Australia in terms of population and distribution of city and rural and regional and so on, but per capita I think it's close to 30 times the volume of digital payments in India versus in Australia. Google plays a significant role across a number of our business units, including the cloud business, the payments business that Will represents, and others in India. and is a significant participant in the digital payments network put out by the released by the Indian government, UPI, a few years back. So the question for you, Will, is given the acknowledging the differences in market between India and Australia, what can we learn from the Indian experience as we think about the evolution of payments in Australia from a volume perspective, a value perspective, and so on?
Yeah, so if we look at our experience in India, it has been very much one that has shown the power of new technology enabling significant economic change. That came about as a result of the introduction of UPI and of a very intelligent sort of system design that encouraged lots of different parties to participate. One party is Google and other third-party wallets that were in the space with us. But it's pretty important to note that the way that the ecosystem grew so quickly is because there was this phenomenal sort of set of rules and systems and processes put in place. So it was designed to scale. And I think if you look at the Australian context and you see what's happening with NPP and the introduction of Pay2, you do see lots of those sound design principles being carried over. And we published some white papers, which I know have been sort of informative globally to different countries as they have looked at the insights that we shared on that. One insight that I can share that I think is particularly relevant in a fintech context is the importance of UX as it comes to adoption. Because it's one thing to have real-time payment rails, it's another thing to have an identity platform, but if users can't use the service in a frictionless manner, or limiting friction, then it will not be adopted. And so when you look at, say, other markets with open banking and you see the low penetration of payment initiation, and then you look at UPI, you go, something there is happening. And from our perspective, one of the things that has really worked well is this sort of native experience where third-party wallets can initiate payments, but you don't have to go and have a redirect for every authorization. So it's secure, there's a lot of trust in the system, but users get it. And without that ability for it to be adopted at scale with delightful experience, it would not be the success it is today. I mean, I think earlier this year they were averaging 5 billion transactions a month on UPI. And we're one participant, there are lots more. And I think that's probably something that I think resonates with a lot of fintechs who are laser focused on UX.
Cool, thank you. All right, we're almost at the end of the time allocated for this session, so I'm going to finish up with a little bit of a future crystal ball session or crystal ball comment. So, of course, the next question I'm going to ask, I'm asking for people's personal opinions here. This is not representative of Google's formal position of what payments will look like in 2030. What I would like to ask each of the three panellists is, what's your view of what the payments industry will look like in 2030 in Australia? 1 minute each. Travis.
Lucky first. I think payments is evolving quickly, and if you look at just the variety of financial instruments, Kunal was talking about micro-lending and micropayments and the transition there, the broad space towards more integrated P2P and M2P stuff like we see with UPI. My philosophy would be, if I look forward in Web3 and crypto, and some of these evolving technologies and what they're empowering, yes, in the immediate sense, that's decentralization and disintermediating the banks or your relationship with your bank to being one that you own more directly and independently. What I think that's probably going to start creating is a much more varied ecosystem by which a variety of financial instruments can be used to control your financial outcomes. And the trust and security that sits behind that will be much more individual, much more personalized. And so, if I look out 10 years at the payments and fintech ecosystem, it's going to be a much more widely varied amount of very personal experiences around how you manage finance, how you manage your payments, and also a much more connected ecosystem. So as you think about what that might look like, think about bids or auctions, in a real-time basis for your payment dollars, as part of transaction fees. or think about very much real-time credit decisions that are happening, not just based on your credit worthiness, but based on what merchants you're doing business with, what's your velocity of transactions look like, and how does that all connect together as an integrated data ecosystem. And I think that's really where the world is going.
Cool, thank you. Kunal, what's your crystal ball saying?
Yeah, so I think the whole idea around, or the trend around micropayments and almost near real-time settlement, that's just going to sort of keep gaining momentum. And where that is going to lead us is most likely towards very interesting business models, new business models that I don't think people have even thought about yet. Simplistically, I can think of, which is more near-term, I think, is something to do with insurance. You get a basic insurance because you only drive your kids to school. But suddenly for a weekend you have to go somewhere else. Being able to sort of get that extra insurance, and the insurance company is making that almost frictionless for you. So those are quite interesting business models. And I think by 2030 we're looking way far ahead, but you almost can see businesses outside of finance actually driving a lot of these experiences. So we all talk about super apps and everything, so don't know what's going to happen there, but I think that's where we're leading with this.
Cool, thank you. And Will, last word from you.
So I think when you look at payments, it's really a function of trust and technology. And it's pretty clear that both of those things will continue to be consistent, but change in the fact that trust will be enhanced and technology will be improved. So what that will unlock, in my personal opinion, is richer ecosystems of participants that have services offered in a micro fashion. So we all talk about embedded finance at the moment and what that is creating, but it will just continue. And the good thing about the Australian market is that there is some very thoughtful work going on in terms of the building blocks that will unlock that. If you think about payments infrastructure, etc., it really is coming. And I'm pretty optimistic about all the fintechs and the small companies that will see opportunities to develop and to build on this and really have huge success.
Excellent, thank you. And with that, I think we are done. So appreciate everyone's attention this morning, and we'll be around for some time after this session. And if anyone's got any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn.